Alright, you guys, I am back here on Willow's Bloom. My name is Courtney, if you don't already know me, and today we are joined by my dear friend, Ricky. I like to call him Ricky Bobby.
What's going on? What's going on, you folks?
And yeah, where can people find you?
So, name's Ricardo Zevart. You can find me on Instagram. It's my full name, Ricardo _Zevart. ZEEVAERT. Most people mess it up, so don't worry about it. You can find that from my website.com, my Instagram handle, or even my YouTube, Lighting the Mandala. Okay?
Yes, go subscribe.
Mm-hmm.
And today we're going to be talking about the eclipse that's happening in Taurus on November 19th. A partial lunar eclipse at 27 degrees of Taurus. And we're also going to be talking about the nodes changing, how this is initiating eclipse season, and maybe a little bit about how this relates to the new moon that just passed in Scorpio. So we're super excited. Do you want to get started? Do you want to say anything?
Yeah, let's jump in. So honestly, it's just an honor to work with Courtney and a fellow Gemini opposite sign to kind of just see what kind of bounces off each other, because honestly we want to make astrology a known language that's applicable and practical for all you guys and viewers out there, because honestly it's a language that I feel like transforms the soul, transforms our lives on a personal daily basis and all our clients' lives. And to be more familiar and understanding with the language is definitely a big goal that we have, that we'd love to reach out and help you guys with. So we just want to jump in. It's a big deal. It's full moon, lunar eclipse. It's starting a whole new saga. And, I think we just kind of want to drop in, make it a little questionnaire, a little talk show, but also bring the data that really can, after knowing you watch this video, open up the highlights of really whoa, what can I get more present with and more engaged with the opportunities that coexist with the nature around you. And, something I like to say is, you have a sunshiny day, but if you're not out there going and taking it, it could just pass on by. So it's all about you getting present with the energy.
And I don't think this will be a sunshiny day, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I think it's a mixed bag, but the November astrology in general is pretty intense. So if you haven't seen my previous video, I talk more than just the new moon that happened in Scorpio at the beginning of the month. I also talk about kind of what tense energies are appearing around the middle of the month. And this is when things start to turn around a little bit, but there is one aspect of this that makes me a little bit nervous, which is the fixed star Algol, which we'll talk about later.
Well, it's a mixed bag.
It's a mixed bag.
For the ordinary person, that's why they're going to watch this video and get it a little figured out. But
so,
I feel you.
How do you perceive a lunar eclipse in people's lives and in society as a whole?
So a lunar eclipse, folks, is we're talking about the moon being eclipsed by the Earth, and basically the sunlight is now going to be cut slightly from the moon. And what I would say that it's basically going to happen is there's an emotional shedding period. That I recognize that. Well, almost with a lunar eclipse, something has been emotionally shed from, and to some area, you really are evolving and moving across with that process. And it's very scorpionic, to be honest, because, it's very much a lunar eclipse is something you've emotionally connected with, and to some level with whatever is in that sign, and being kind of cut away to some amount. And I believe this is a partial eclipse, but when there's been I think there was a lunar eclipse, blood moons is how they'll show up. Those total lunar eclipses really just kind of, it's not to expect they can decimate some people, but honestly, it's where you've refreshed yourself to a new state of being. I've experienced them in Leo around my ascendant very much, and had a different really deep soul connection to how am I showing up? How am I being present? How am I captivating this energy? So, but the fact that it's going to be in the sign of Taurus, that is a fixed earth sign, it does rule the material, could be how you view a relationship with material goods and affection. And I say affection with Taurus because it's ruled by the planet Venus. And sometimes, it's actually having things and experiencing a higher quality of nourishment, and sometimes sensuality, if you will, from the five senses. But yeah.
Yeah, and so this eclipse season, which this is kind of kicking it off, really. We still have the nodes in Gemini and Sagittarius, and we'll get into that later. But essentially we're going to be starting eclipses along the Taurus Scorpio axis. And so you guys who have planets in Taurus and Scorpio, or angles like your ascendant or your midheaven, you're going to be really heavily impacted by this. Like he was saying, when it hit his ascendant, and when eclipses hit his ascendant, he was questioning how he was showing up in life. And when eclipses hit my midheaven in my 10th house, which is around career, I completely threw away something I had been studying and doing for so many years and just started astrology.
Wow.
So you can see an immense change in your character, but you basically are becoming more in alignment with your soul and your path. But oftentimes it's like you're kicking up a lot of the sand, and so your life can feel a little crazy, a little chaotic. And it's interesting because this is an eclipse in Taurus, which likes to be really stable.
Right.
But there is that element of Scorpio that doesn't want stability. It almost thrives a little bit on like crises.
A little bit of chaos.
A little bit of
chaos helps with transformation,
right,
and passion, and
right,
all those things. Yeah.
So what do you feel like is the biggest shift for people likely going to happen at this time, just based off of the fact that it's a Taurus eclipse?
You know, I really think this is going to be a really interesting one because full moon Tauruses I find are really beautiful full moons. It's exalted position of the moon, so it's one of the strongest places for the moon to be next to Cancer. And this allows us to really be kind of grounded in our pros and cons and what is actually feeling really good to be connected with. You know, a lot of good friends I have that have moon in Taurus, they love to be around the like spoils of life, so to be like decadent chocolate, massage, high top shelf liqueurs, like so potentially substances and beauties of the earth, you know, and like when it's a lunar eclipse, I feel it's gonna hit, you know, your personal life, whether however it hits someone's chart, but as a collective, the mundane, you know, I think it's something where we're going to have a different position on like what is actually nourishing and be a little bit more simplistic, you know, because Taurus kind of like cuts it down to some of the bare bones, like what do I need that's just essential. I hear that most people with moon and Taurus, like they only make certain buys, but they buy the best of that thing and they want it to hang on and last for a long time. We have Uranus that's been in Taurus for a little while, and I feel that this is with the collective of like, hey, what do you value? And what do you really hang on to your values? This is representative of Taurus, value, money, currency. That I think is going to change how we emotionally connect as a society to the things that we're valuing. But I want to say that I think it's going to be from the wake up of this kind of South Node Sag, North Node Gemini illusion that a lot of people haven't been like really with the facts or really been with the perspective of what's been in their collective environment. It's very difficult. It's very difficult with Taurus, and not to get too far out here, but like the last time we had Uranus and Taurus was in the 1930s and 40s, around World War II. And you kind of have all these world powers trying to find, hey, I value this, I value that, and all trying to get along for something is something that, like, it's testing our humanity. It's testing our humanity with a lot of things.
There's a couple of things I want to say on that. So I actually did pull the Devil card and the Queen of Wands for this eclipse. And I find it interesting that you're talking specifically about, like, luxuries and really savoring things. Because oftentimes the Devil can represent things that we are attached to that are maybe not as nourishing but feel nourishing, like hey, I'm gonna smoke tonight and like eat a bunch of food because that's like how I take care of myself, like self-love, but you know it's actually not nourishing you in terms of like your long-term happiness. So that could kind of come up at this time. And then the second thing was touching on the nodes. He was just talking about the Gemini North Node. So we are moving over, especially when it moves in January 18th, we are going to be moving towards like Taurus energy. So Taurans especially will see how their life starts to expand. But oftentimes where the South Node is actually kind of where we are collectively. So like the ideal is Taurus, but we're more so stuck in like Scorpio energy. So as I was just saying, Scorpio is often related to like crisis situations, deep psychoanalysis, a level of mistrust between people, and with
find trust,
And with so many beliefs with Sagittarius season, so many different opinions, I feel like now we're approaching everything with a level of skepticism moving into this next year. So I feel like certain people could be outed, or certain like information could lead to people to questioning things that they've always kind of taken as fact. And so that might be on a collective level, but then also for ourselves personally. Like maybe I've always just kind of gone to these things or done these things, but then you start to question things like a little bit more in your personal life as well.
Yeah, completely. So I do want to give a little rundown for the nodes.
Yeah.
And it's pretty cool because, you know, you're a Gemini, I'm a Sag, and we've had the North
yeah,
and South
so
nodes in this situation.
Yeah.
And to be clear with someone, a quick little lesson, the nodes are too powerful to not know for yourself in your own birth chart. But to share this on a collective level, they are where the knots in time where the sun and moon will meet and have an eclipse. So where the nodes stand, north node and south node, are very huge on like where the collective progress of society or what is striving, where the energy is seeking to go. And the south node is where it's been a comfort zone. It's actually needing updating. It's actually been like, it's sometimes illusionary. Sometimes south node in the worst place is very deceptionary. Like we're seeing a mirage of the situation. And so this has been in Sagittarius, my sign. And so knowing this, I walked into this going like, well, you know what, Ricky? You might not have it all figured out. You might not have all these elements where Sagittarian energy is about beliefs, religion, travel, education, and a little bit of like an all-knowing, so in some places guruism and stuff like that. Well, the truth is that we don't have it all figured out in this Jupiterian energy, and North Node Gemini is actually telling us to like hone in with your surrounding environment and go jump into it now, in the moment, in the present. That little bumblebee, which I like to describe Gemini sometimes as a bumblebee, like picking up pollen, make that honey, like you know. And it's something with all of us is like, you don't need to wait on the message. You don't need to go on another exploration to go find out some new impactful information. It's already with you right now. And this is so huge because the truth is no one's doing. North Node is almost like it's a little bit of work, and no one wanted to do that. Doesn't I want to say this is like collectively it's been difficult to find a group of people that want to do the North Node Gemini work, which is like do your own research, hear both sides to the story, go interact to your immediate environment and do what you have, you know. And you know, just to share this, I mean, I would have theorized South Node Sagittarius is world travel would be near to gone. Education is going to be very difficult or solemn. And basically, like, not that organized religional groups aren't going to have their meaning, but like we're really going to have to just kind of like strive into like what's in our immediate environment. It's like Gemini. And my cutest analogy has been like, go make your best snow globe. Go be in the snow globe with the little things that like personify you. And South Node Sagittarius is like genuinely swapped all my beliefs on like, oh, my intuition sees that's a definite situation. And sure enough, for the most of the collective, this can hit really hard with people waking up like what I believe, and this is South Node Fire. It's like I have this action, I believe in this, I'm pulling through with this situation, I'm acting endlessly into it. People are frustrated because they might not be in the right, you know. And Gemini's getting Sag to go do more research, change your approach, change your strategy, like, you know, strategize, which Gemini knows how to twist or play and change the way that we play the game in itself. So. And
there's a level of open-mindedness that having the North Node in Gemini has called us to. And I think a lot of people haven't answered that call, to be honest. They're like sticking more to their guns because that's what the South Node is this very sticky energy. It's like a fly trap. Like you get stuck in it and you think that that's right and you don't want to move. But that's why it's so helpful to know the astrology and so that you guys can move towards the North Node, how we're being asked to evolve as an individual and as a society. So when the nodes shift into Taurus and Scorpio, how do you see this in terms of like what's going to affect us on a societal level? Like with the South Node being in Scorpio, how do you think that that's going to affect us on a kind of mundane.
So we're jumping the gun into some of this, but we got to talk about this. You know? Basically, this lunar eclipse full moon is the starting point, the first page of like a saga that we're about to finish, the Gemini Sag saga of like at least the South Node, Sag, North Node, Gemini, which by the way is the exalted nodal position. When we go into South Node Scorpio and North Node Taurus, this is actually letting people relax into not letting their fears fully control them. Because I feel like South Node and Scorpio wants to keep pushing almost a chaotic agenda, or that fearful of stability. Like it's always striving with that Mars energy to find what is secure, who to trust, who's this, what do I need in my life that's actually like, I'm in survival mode. I feel like South Node in Scorpio is going to be survival mode. And I will say this, there's going to be a lot of truths, if they haven't been already coming out literally today or the next couple of days. A lot of truths get exfoliated when the North Node's in Gemini, because it's like, oh, what you thought it was gets exposed, and Gemini's like, yep, here's the data, it's on the table, kaboom. It's just objective information. I feel like there is going to be this little turning point where now like we can upgrade our perception and hopefully our form of communicating ourselves, which I really emphasize that. When the North Node goes into Taurus, the healing exists with actually inner peace and actually allowing ourselves to accept inner transformation, Scorpio, and with our emotions go through the battle within to actually allow ourselves to enjoy the garden on the outside. And that's my biggest thing, is like North Node in Taurus is actually a time of being ruled by the Venusian qualities of Taurus, and you're like, let yourself enjoy life, stop and smell the roses kind of mentality, and realize that all the richness is around you, and by connecting with that, you're actually exponentiating the frequency of all that is like satiating around you, versus where South Node Scorpio is going to be like a little, I would imagine, going to be a little bit fearful, paranoid, sometimes is constantly going for the next fix of dopamine sometimes too, which I'm not saying that both of these signs don't like to relish, but like in Taurus it's a lot more subtle, it's a lot more simpler, it's a little bit more peaceful in its demeanor, and I do feel though it's also going to be owning things of our value that we identify with, and actually saying, you know what, because Aries is the first sign of the zodiac, this is where we identify ourselves, but then Taurus being the second sign is really now in Earth. How do I actually create that, manifest that in the world, actually embody the true value of what this individual characteristic identity can be? And I feel like so important for people to like recognize that we're moving into like really like just be able to stand in a posture of who we are, and what is actually going to be like, you know, we've talked about it, we found up some ideas, but actually North Node Taurus, I think we're going to have a North Node meet with Uranus. And I know we're kind of jumping here, but like that's exciting. That I will say there'll be a test for humanity to like, hey, stop getting in all your own fears or trauma about all this, but like actually you can just heal all the trauma by just being with bliss itself. That's what I really feel from Taurus. I want to hear your thoughts though too.
That the Uranus conjunction is probably a little too far in the future.
It's a little too far, but it's an exciting.
It's something to look forward to.
Yeah,
for sure. It's like a really massive moment in history. So it's important to mention it along the way. So I think the last thing maybe I'd want to mention about it is that with the Scorpio, like the South Node is already about like excreting. So it's like the end of the dragon, and then Scorpio is kind of already like that in nature, so there's this like dying off that is inherent in it, in sort of being able to rebuild. So I feel like the Taurus North Node is about the building process, and the South Node in Scorpio is about the destruction. And so I think we are, as a society, are meant to be focusing on the new thing that we want to be creating. I do think it's going to be difficult because, as I said, the South Node is really sticky. And so the fact that we have this kind of dying off process, also kind of aligning with the year we're having a US Pluto return, I think it's going to be really hard to keep building and like wanting to create this stable financial future for ourselves when as a country we're going to go through this massive economic restructuring, possibly even collapse. Who really knows what's going to happen?
Right.
But it is Pluto involved. We're talking about Scorpio and the South Node. These are all things about leaving old things behind, allowing them to decay. And Taurus wants us to hold onto what nourishes us. So it's like once all these things are stripped away, what is left and what do we truly value as a society and as an individual? And so this eclipse is giving us like a little bit of a taste of this on a personal level. What are those values? What are those things that nourish us, like you were saying? And I think we're gonna have to really hold on to them and like have internal strength and self-worth and self-confidence, which are all Tauran themes, as we move through this really tumultuous like next couple of years likely. And I think hopefully Taurus will give us a little bit of that stability if we can just move towards it.
Yeah. I really think there's going to be, I just feel with the nodes finishing in Gemini that, we might wake up to some really big truths. And I feel like when the South Node enters Scorpio, those eclipses will feel like very intense, because this is, for me personally, when I really got into astrology, the North Node was in Scorpio. So I'm kind of having this weird, finally went through all the nodes and halfway through the nodal axis. And those were moments of actually leaving what was stable and what was just good to then go for something like you're really deeply passionate about. And that's where we're leaving. South Node elements are almost putting that sign at its lesser deacon of vibration, if you will. Sometimes we can't grasp all the best parts about it because the South Node's hold on, we've been doing this a long time. It's time to go North Node to help us in our sovereign evolution. And it's also where all the glitter and all the gold is. In this situation, well, now they're swapped. I just see that it's going to be something where Scorpio is going to be a little bit more, we're thinking this plutonic, doomsday, fearful, everything's chaos and oh, I need to do that. I need to fight for my survival. I need to, keep doing these things. Mars. And I actually think that it's actually hold on, slow down, take a deep breath. And these are fixed positions. So the fixed position is actually in Taurus, having things that you really value, that are really there, that hey, I really identify this matches my value system. It's something that feels relishing. It's I love oranges, and someone likes pineapples, it's a different value system with Taurus. To that person, that's the so valuable, gimme, and that's something that's physical that we actually have and feel this kind of sense of security with too in Taurus. It's really nourishing. And not just that, it's we do feel good. The spiritual community sometimes has bias against material possessions, which Taurus can represent, but everyone feels good opening up a present on Christmas.
Yeah.
Everyone feels good.
Or having money in their bank accounts to pay their bills.
Yeah, I'm sure people feel a spiritual thing when money goes up or down for them to some level, and we don't need to double down on that. It's all about your perspective. But having a car that works, that's something that's very Tauran. It's very hey, I have this, and it's something that you can feel a sense of security and a sense of roundedness with. And I think it's actually allowing us to receive with Venus being there, allow us to receive the good stuff.
And I think because it's the North Node, it might feel like a stretch at times, or might feel difficult for some people, especially if they have a lot of Scorpio in their chart and it's they're already embodying that energy. It's kind of a lot of lessons for them in terms of how to receive, how to simplify, and just focus on the really key aspects that are important to them. So should we talk about the aspects to this and how it's on the fixed star then?
So yeah, I think now we've really introduced a lot of the nodes for our viewers, and I think it's really good to just actually drop in what are we looking at as the first partial lunar eclipse here in Taurus in Scorpio. Yeah, because we're having full-blown Scorpio season, Mercury and Mars at home in Scorpio.
They're strong.
And like Courtney was saying, this lunar eclipse is exactly aligned with the star Algol.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, what if you guys didn't know this, the fixed star Algol is literally Medusa's head that I believe Perseus is holding, like, in the constellations. So.
Yeah, look up a picture of that. Or I can put a picture.
Yeah. Do you want to drop in on that, or like two to tango with?
Yeah. So, I don't have a lot of personal experience like studying this fixed star or anything, but I do follow some teachers who've used it, and it seems to be usually associated with a level of misfortune. So that does concern me a little bit because, you know, we are talking about how all this is kind of tying into our values and our material wealth and our sense of security, and the fact that it's on this like this kind of evil fixed star.
Well, I have a different perspective.
Yeah, we have different perspectives.
I feel what you're saying.
But I think that could be somewhat of a challenge. But I think that I like your perspective in terms of, because we already talked about it before this.
Just a little chat. Yeah.
In terms of like, not, I guess, falling into that. So I feel like there are always going to be like the lower vibration and the opportunity to move into the higher vibration. Mm-hmm. So I think some people in some situations could fall into this and become greedy or do things like where they're willing to do whatever it takes to make something happen. And that's something that I feel like I've felt for a lot of November was like just not the best kind of energy, where I feel like the vibe of like people are willing to fight and do whatever they can do to get what they want and what they think is right, what makes them feel good. That's like a vibe that I got from the astrology in November.
Right.
So
very Mars and Scorpio.
Right. Yeah. And like, yeah, Mars opposite Uranus, and just people willing to go beyond maybe what they normally would.
Totally. That is happening, by the way. Mars opposed Uranus, literally upon the lunar eclipse. It's happening. That combo is happening that day too.
Okay.
So the basically the aspects on this day are nuts. They're gnarly. We want to make them simplified and make it like a little bit. But we got a huge sandwich of like ingredients stacking this one. It's like it's way up there. So
yeah.
I do want to talk about Algol though.
Yeah, what's your perspective?
So I will just share this. We've seen a couple people with star Algol. It's 26 Taurus, but basically rising above where it sits is basically Medusa's head that Perseus slayed. So you want to get mythology for a little moment. Medusa's head is definitely representative of, it's even been nicknamed the demon star, you know, the English translation. From the Arabic word, it was maiden. So the Arabs found this star and they named it. English translation could be the demon star. But here's my perspective. This is the transmutable scorpionic thing that you can do with this. And you have the devil card. So we want to talk about this a little bit.
And the Queen of Wands.
And the Queen of Wands, which we have a pretty aggressive major arcana card to like a pretty liberating, beautiful, like queenly fire energy, creative fire energy. So with this being said, not to get to the tarot yet, but Algol, if you're doing something for a Taurian jewel in life, let's say it's a prized jewel, Algol, I believe, and what some other astrologers and things I've heard and read, is that if you're doing it for purely selfish reasons, it kind of comes back to bite you in the butt. And it's not really done for the good of all. It kind of, there is what you're giving out is what's coming back to you effect. Mm-hmm. And it is prominent because it will give you what you want, especially with Mars opposing Uranus in Taurus, you know. But my biggest thing that I want to share with the collective is that Algol, if used for the collective or used outside of using it for a divine purpose and reason, is that energy that actually emits to all things and creates beauty and abundance for all people. So it's like giving you a super big wish. And Algol can be like the demon star, someone just using, I want money or this or that or whatever, you know, and a very Taurus Scorpio thing is what I want, you know. Especially Mars and Scorpio makes us like have a certain kind of hunger, has a certain kind of like area where we want to be satiated. I just say this, with a lunar eclipse coming into Taurus, what can you seek out to have for yourself, but is also going to allow us to relinquish and actually own something for the good of all and sit in that garden. I think it's something really big that the collective. So we want to jump right back into the lunar eclipse for November 19th. Technically it's the 18th on Thursday, pardon me. But, we were talking about Algol. We were talking about, is this a doomsday star? Is it a highline star or something? But what I was just telling Courtney is, so like we said, Algol, it literally is the star that's representing the head of Medusa that Perseus, that slayed Medusa for. So, well, to address your cards, is she picked the Devil card and
the Queen of Wands.
Queen of Wands, okay? So we basically have this like pretty gruesome, very desiring energy, and this like actually very majestic, feminine, empowered, creative, queenly energy. And the way I looked at this in literally the correspondence of Algol is that the lunar eclipse is hitting a star that will grant you great power, great wars, a grand jewel, so to speak. But you can look at Medusa as definitely this kind of devil card, satiated desire, of what you want and what you want to get. And we have Mars and Scorpio. So just share this is like I was just saying, we're all fighting and desiring to satiate this like dopamine fix. Mars and Scorpio has got the edge, and since it's in the water element, it definitely wants to nourish itself and get what it wants, and so sometimes we can almost dope ourselves out with this situation. Well, the other element is that the story is that Perseus actually removed the head of Medusa and used it to kind of like slay the Kraken for the good of his like homeland, And that is some of the elements, kind of the symbolism we're going to roll with this situation for Algol is like, what are you doing genuinely? And look, this is with intention for the good of like outside of yourself, or Taurus is just going to give you this golden apple and you keep it for yourself. What you put out comes back. And so I look at this as like, that could, I would say come back to bite you or something as far as the devil is concerned, is that you're allowing yourself to be enslaved. The symbolism within the tarot card is not as bad as people make it out to be, but it is representative of a man and woman that have loose chains on their neck, and they choose to be enslaved. They choose to be controlled, which I don't believe needs to be the case at all. In fact, that's where I'm seeing this Algol just to satiate her own fix will just get greedy potentially. But if you're doing something with the power to literally involve yourself on a divine collective and embodied state for the good of all, then this Algol becomes a tool to really help satiate some element of humanity, some element of outside of yourself to be used for a really beautiful cause. So I don't think it needs to be just blatantly put down as like, a demon star, but we just want to say that I would say it's pretty powerful. It gets looked at as a major fixed star, so to speak. So, but in far as your tarot, I just find it's times where like, what have we been allowing ourselves to get locked in desire, like locked in for just what we want, instead of like being able to be more in touch with the Queen of Wands,
right?
Which she's like empowered, dignified in her creative principle. She knows her value, knows her truth, and she creates in the world and doesn't really need to get anyone else's validation for what wants to be created. I'm seeing that as one of the more idealistic, transmutable, creative, and enlightening placements of where this lunar eclipse can foreshadow this next saga within Taurus and Scorpio, personally.
And another layer I wanted to add on to that is that the Queen of Wands is one of the most confident cards. So she knows exactly how good she is at manifesting, and she uses her passions and her desires for a positive outlet in her life, and that grows her confidence. Whereas the Devil card are temptations or things that we will tend to gravitate to make us feel better temporarily, so we might feel temporarily more confident, but in the long run it actually diminishes our sense of self-worth. And so I think another way to look at this is also, how are your behaviors and your thoughts and your actions going to end up long term? Are they moving you towards the Queen of Wands, or is it taking on the negative form of this Algol star and this negative devil energy and allowing yourself to kind of get swept up in the dopamine hits rather than the long-term nourishment, which is something that you have said many times and I've quoted you many times.
Right.
But I just love that word specifically for this because I think that true nourishment happens on all levels of being. It's not just like your food, but also like your spiritual level and your social level. And so I think that's a good time to kind of analyze what's going on internally, because this is a lunar eclipse, and asking yourself like what you can move away from in order to align with what is truly fulfilling for you. And I think that's going to be a common theme even for this whole next year in 2022, but we won't get into that.
Not yet.
Not today.
Sooner or later.
So what do you think about this moon making a trine to Pluto and a square to Jupiter?
So, yeah, great questions. I love that you're asking me like all my opinions on this, but I really want to hear yours, and I know we're concurring, but I really appreciate it, Courtney. It's awesome. So the truth is we have Pluto at 24 Capricorn, and it is now gone forward. It hasn't really moved much because not only is Pluto a slow planet, but it hasn't even really got going in its speed yet. What goes on is that we have it at 24 Capricorn Earth, and this is going to be at 27 Taurus Earth that is making a trine to Pluto. This is telling me that it's going to hit us even deeper on the psychological basis of what we want for our long term in Capricorn. And beyond that, it can hit elements of like, our true desires and what do we really want and what is really making us feel nourished for like the long-term feat. Because that's really what Pluto in Capricorn is trying to do. But it is, I won't lie, and even like Pluto in Capricorn could represent where are you being held hostage into an outdated system of where you think you're getting satiated and nourished, because the truth is Pluto is allowing you to either bring destruction for the good of yourself, to allow something to be cut out, or actually to be rebirthed in the placement of like, you know what, this is truly nourishing and touching and really opening me up to a different place of self-value because I deserve this and I love this and this is who I am. Pluto allows you to make that psychological pivot, that true transformational change that allows you to break free from the cocoon and awaken into a different state of life. Especially in the earth energy, you can experience that internally with Scorpio and have the external bloomed out around you. So I don't just think it's a basic situation at all. It's working with Pluto, and this is the moments to bring life or death to situations, like, or rebirth, so to speak, Not to mention, and this might be another topic, but that's the last day that Venus is shadow in Capricorn, which for those that do or don't believe in astrology, those are the things that really are orchestrated in such a divine order that like what's kind of showing up on that last day, Venus will do a whole retrograde and come back to that exact moment in time till the end of the year and then some, to be honest. And the nodes will shift literally during that Venus retrograde. So I don't want to open it up with the Venus retrograde yet, but like that is a checkpoint. It's not just a lunar eclipse full moon, it's also trine Pluto, and it's got this Venus retrograde at the end of shadow, which I will say this, if you're trying to manifest new things and new opportunities and new career patterns, you want to do that before Venus goes shadow. I found my house that I stay in the day before Venus went into shadow. The day Venus went into shadow, found the house, called the person, set everything up, that when it went retrograde, it lasted. It stayed there. So that's like a big Venus retrograde strategy. So when I am adding down, double downing, is that I think it hitting Pluto, this is a big checkpoint. This is a big crossroad in where we're going. I just also think it's a big deal to find out, like, getting present, getting focused with Pluto too. Focus on what it is that really is moving you forward to a new stance. So the truth is, like, there are things that are really going to come into our lives. I think beautiful things. But we need to make sure that we're on the right track with them and not being totally delusional, because sometimes we can get greedy with this kind of energy. And, it's definitely want to have things our way and have them where we want. And, but we are with Mars in Scorpio and then Venus and Capricorn. We have this water Earth sextile. This is definitely getting really clear on the glue of things we want for our long term. Like I would say Capricorn and Scorpio really like, we want to know like really what's in for the long haul, like really what's pushing us that we want to hang on to for a long, long time, you know, and like root into and grow from that position, you know. So I think it's really important to like, you get like a wish, what are you using it for kind of vibe. I don't know how heavy it needs to sit in for people, and I don't want to make it extra heavy because Taurus should be like light, but follow what feels good and trust that, and feels good on a like I would even say a spiritual level and a refreshing level too, like you know, shedding off like a lot of this extra chaotic baggage that can be formulated. That's why it's a lunar eclipse. Let's cut off what we don't really need anymore and like hit a little bit more of like what does really matter, and that's on an emotional level. And I think that's where we're going to have this really permeated transmutation that might happen for society on a big whabam. So yeah.
And I like that it's making a trine to Pluto, because I feel like there's a continuation from the last new moon, where I think a lot of us, especially with the sun in Scorpio, we're discovering like maybe things that we hide from ourselves, or you just have to face this certain truth, right? And if we're having an eclipse happening in Taurus, there is that element of building. Like Taurus is this kind of consistent, habitual type of action, but we don't want to do that unconsciously. And so that's why I feel like this trine to Pluto is so key, is it helps us face the truth of, like we've been saying all this time, what is truly aligned with our values, what is truly nourishing, and then build more upon that, and then release the things that aren't. So you might have kind of noticed in that last new moon with Scorpio, some things come up where you realized, oh, this is getting in my way, or hey, this is maybe something I haven't fully faced yet. And those are the things that we're going to have to transcend, so that we can have this more stable emotional life as we move forward. That's the hope anyway. And hopefully with this square in Jupiter, it will bring some optimism, although the square can also bring excess and greed and things like that. So I don't know, how would you interpret the moon making a square to Jupiter?
You know, the truth is, Jupiter is one of my ruling planets. I love Jupiter, and Jupiter in Aquarius, though, the truth is, though, is it's making us, like, it's not really going to get the big, it's a square, but it's also within Jupiter with the South Node area. So, like, the truth is, Pluto is going to be the bigger energy to kind of focus on and set into. The Jupiter element can maybe, like, get over hopeful emotionally on things that might not be, like, holding their truth, or like allowing yourself to like feel it totally heavy, but it might feel a bigger experience almost, and definitely with a square to Jupiter. In Taurus and in Aquarius, it's definitely much more about like what are you focused on, kind of in a vibrational stat, to what is physically there. And so sometimes we can get too idealistic, in my opinion, with Jupiter and Aquarius. So idealistic that it's almost impractical. That's very rare, but it can tend to happen.
I have this natally, so I'm laughing. I have like Mercury square Jupiter. And I have to say, how my brain works is the first thing that comes to my mind is the end result, which is usually like a decade from now. And then I have to practically like walk myself back to where are we in the present moment? What's actually possible right now? So the square to Jupiter, if we are like, okay, I'm going to stop smoking, like I'm going to cut this out, I'm going to face this truth about myself, like I have this addiction. The square with Jupiter is going to be like, well, I'm going to stop cold turkey today and it's never going to be an issue. And it's like this kind of idealistic thing where you see the end goal, but maybe what is the best thing is to bring it back more to the Taurus, which is like, what's the daily little things I can do that feels much more manageable, much more realistic. So that's something that I do think having the moon in Taurus will help balance it a little bit, but Jupiter is always going to come in here and light things up, but sometimes it lights it up so much that we think more is possible than actually is possible.
We're trying to shove all the clothes in this big suitcase, and we're like, yeah, it'll fit. I'm going to make it all fit. And we didn't like kind of have some mercurial, like Gemini perspective on that situation to actually make sure it actually does fit. And sometimes Jupiter in that square with Aquarius is being, either too idealistic, over calculating, because sometimes you got to go with, I think Pluto is a deeper, kind of even intuitive psychic perception, where Jupiter in Aquarius just might get little, you're too calculating. You're trying so hard to figure it out. You're trying just to be in the right vibration, and there's a moment where like Taurus like, actually just be with what is nourishing. Like, you know, it, like, I think, so I'm not saying settle, I'm not saying that, but it's also like, I think idealism with Jupiter there is going to get just way out of whack, you know, like way over the top. And that's for me as a Jupiter ruled person. Like, that's me. Like, I really love, I'm also getting sextiled with this. So like, I'm happy about this Jupiter in Aquarius. It's just, I mean, it's actually right on my descendant too. So it's really interesting. But yeah, so I just think it's something like really, emotions might get overblown. I do think with Jupiter sometimes we get a little too like extra high horse sometimes, which isn't a problem when you're at least in a good alignment with something. It's gonna feel like a big story part of your life. I feel it's a big chapter, maybe a bigger event. You're possibly very memorable, you know, but it's making sure you stay with the logistics of what is actually happening, which is what I would advise with that.
Right, and again, I feel like the moon being in Taurus will help us become more practical. So hopefully the energies will balance it out. Yeah, so that's pretty much all I really wanted to say actually for this moon. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
Gosh, a lot actually. I mean, hui chihuahuas. I mean, the Venus retrograde. So Venus is actually trining Uranus same day too. Exactly. Okay. So we got, it's another thing on the sandwich, but that's beautiful. And to be honest, so we have Venus, the ruler of Taurus.
Exactly, trining. Yeah.
Trining, which means the Earth is having a good relationship with the Earth, and in Uranus, which is in Taurus. So this is an electric, exciting, fruitful, like, relationship, possibly job, like, upgrading, promotional kind of time to find, like, something spontaneously is growing in your garden that could be fruitful. Mm-hmm. Or however so you look at that, but it definitely is a positive alignment, and it does correspond to like where you might go into society, I think, because we got Capricorn and Taurus kind of going here for like, hey, what's enriching, what are we working towards for a better, wholesome, grander life. That alignment's great. That's extremely awesome. So it's just
it's really fortuitous for changes around your finances and relationships. So being that the moon is in Taurus, those things are already a little bit more center stage since Venus is the ruler of Taurus. So I feel like if you guys are wanting to actually shed some of these things, Venus being in a trine with Uranus is saying this is actually possible. And also with the trine with Pluto, it's like you can truly put an end to something that needs to be ended so that you can build, like we were saying, something more substantial in your life. And for a lot of us, it will be around finances because of Taurus and Venus, but it could also be around relationships or anything else in your life that feels really solid and tangible.
Yeah. I'd like to add one last thing too. Like again, we have Mercury 21 Scorpio in trine to Neptune in 20. Mm-hmm. So it's going to feel spiritual. It's going to feel emotionally called. I would honestly say within Scorpio, it's going to feel psychic a bit, like kind of like peering through the waters. Now it's funny because there's these retrograde planets, but there's receiving some insight, you know, receiving some soul calling to some of these things. Like, don't think it's going to be completely non-existed in your psyche of something you might need to end to move on to the better ground, or that there's something that's ready to bloom in the high ground, and actually Mars and Scorpio saying go for it, you know, like go into it and enjoy the good life, you know. And I'm having that in many places in my personal life personally. There was one last itty bitty teeny weeny little thing I wanted to go over, but it's definitely with the almost escaped me at this moment, I won't lie to you. I would say the lunar eclipse with all this trine, I'm thinking something also could be removed that we once valued. What we used to think was valuable in a place, I'm not saying is no longer, but will literally change form to a place where now we're able to have a different sense of value. with a lunar eclipse in that, I feel like, hey, sometimes it could be as simple as like, I love this and I had this part of my life all the time and I have this value on it, and the lunar eclipse is actually shedding in a place like, this chapter is over and it's time to move on to bigger and better things, and maybe have those things just evolve into new form. And that Venus trine Uranus, epic serendipitous events. Mercury trining Neptune, psychic awareness and intuitive emotional connection. Like, you know, there's barely any fire in the zodiac at all. There's no fire. It's just really enriching water and earth with a little bit of air. And I'm saying, like, I think it's really important us to feel nourished, flow with what wants to be flown with, and especially if it's something moving us, progressing us forward and allowing us to see something new we've never seen before. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, I mean, we could talk about Mars a little bit with sextiling Venus and opposing Uranus. I talked about that in my last video.
Yeah.
But maybe we should touch on that because it's so big. Again.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I like that it's making a sextile to Venus. Being opposite Uranus has like a little bit of an intensity to it. It will be
intense.
Ending.
Pretty intense.
I mean, it will be on the ending bit. Like, it's more so intense in the middle of the month when it's exact. But around now, it's like starting to fade a little bit. Yeah. So how do you see that?
So Mars opposing Uranus, and especially Mars wins on this one because Mars is in full dignified rulership in Scorpio. Uranus is at fall in Taurus. So Mars in Scorpio is going to feel like way over busted. Honestly, it is where I think we're going to get that extra snap on something we do want too. So, but you got to check in with yourself again. Is this something that you really authentically want or not? So these emotions, however they tie into the storybook of your life, is a different situation. But Mars and Scorpio opposing Uranus, you sometimes have felt bogged down, or like you need to break free, and there's like this checkpoint to like break free of a situation, like a mundane routine probably won't happen on this day. An average day-to-day probably won't happen. But Mars is the masculine and Venus is the feminine energy. When they're in a perfect sextile, they're getting along great. They're getting along really great, and I think this is really good for like intimacy, relationships, cooperating, putting your passion into projects, really big, honestly, to seeing the fruit come out of them. I think, yeah, so I'm looking at this as a very fruitful garden kind of like lunar eclipse, but it might definitely have potential melancholy elements of like, you know, these rebirthing and like kind of pruning the bush kind of element, you know, like pruning things off that like, you know, it's also fall too, like, you know, some things that have bloomed last, you know, I got a garden that bloomed beautifully, but, you know, it's ready to be transmuted into something fresh and new for the next chapter ahead. So
yeah, I mentioned this on one of my podcast episodes a while back, but I was talking to someone who, like, I guess an arborist, like someone who takes care of plants and trees.
Yeah.
And I was like, my plant is always dying, and I don't know how to help it. And he was like, you need to trim off all the dead leaves and branches because it keeps trying to send nutrients there.
Right.
So it's like you have a limited resource. Like, the pruning is so necessary in the garden. We want to have the luscious vegetables. We want to have the beautiful flowers. But
relationships, businesses, finances, yeah.
Which is all Taurus. But like he said, we have to release some things in that process that we might still want. Like, we might still want that branch. It might seem a little scary to cut it off of ourselves, but it's also what is helping us truly grow. And so I think that Mars sextile Venus is telling us to take initiative towards releasing some of those things, and we will attract even more of what we want into our life. And with the opposition with Uranus, I feel like that's almost giving the backing from the universe. Like, if you're not going to do this yourself, there's going to be something that happens in your life that's kind of going to force your hand. That's how I see Uranus a lot, is like, sometimes these things are out of your control, but Mars is our initiative. So it's like, if you take enough initiative, maybe those outside things won't come in and sweep you away, you know?
Right. It's definitely some effort taking place here and really pushing it forward, but like, I see, like, you know, we have to have that masculine principle to share what we're passionate into and kind of replant, so to speak. And Uranus, I do hear what you're saying, like something unpredictable. It's almost impossible. What I'd like to say with Uranus is expect the unexpected.
Right.
Because it's almost like what you thought you calculated, you can't even foresee this equation, you know?
Right.
So that's going to kind of activate some of the areas within this. And I think that'll be felt more on the Wednesday when the moon goes into over Uranus. Because it'll be exactly opposed Uranus on the Thursday. It says initiating this Taurian feeling, and then in the Thursday, we're really being able to kind of bask within that lunar eclipse cycle. So I think it's extreme. I think it's exciting. It's big times. They're kind of starting a whole new saga. So.
And I feel like, I mean, it is making a sextile to Venus, so this might not be applicable, but just kind of warning people against like accidents. You know, just be a little bit extra careful around that time whenever we have Mars, like with Uranus. Some things might not go as you expected. And he just got into an accident, so he knows personally. Yeah,
I think it was literally the new moon in Scorpio, 12th house for me. I'm getting a little personal, but I mean, Scorpio's always been a crazy energy for me since 2014 when I went through the eclipses. And the moon went over Pluto in Capricorn. The crazy 7-7 moon on Saturn the next day. I had Mars on my Jupiter. Long story short, I got in a front end collision, and it wasn't my fault. It was a green light, seatbelt, 30 miles an hour, doing everything right, so to speak, looking. And, you know, something unexpected, very Uranian. The new moon was opposed Uranus. And I said it in my video, my new moon Scorpio is like, you think you have everything figured out? This is so unpredictable of like a 2-week climaxing at this lunar eclipse that you can't really put your finger on how it is, but it's really being in that flow and feeling in your value of what you can plant and harvest and know that this is what is good for me and what's going to be nourishing. And there's a lot of like transformation all over this week, all over this time. So yeah. Appreciate you so much, Courtney.
I know.
This is
so
such a blast.
On.
Like I love it.
Is there anything else you wanted to say before we wrap up?
I've said a lot, so I'm a talking chatterbox. You know, when I ask the Gemini, what are your like ultimate thoughts over the tarot reading? I don't know if you've ever. We were so blessed to be able to create this space and put out a lunar eclipse video, but what are some things that you kind of feel are transforming for you, or something that like, or you know, from the new moon into this lunar eclipse, what do you feel is an overall progression or something?
Well, I feel like some things came up around the Scorpio new moon for me personally that I wasn't necessarily focusing on, but I was like, oh, that is an issue in my life. And so I could see this eclipse kind of having me face that more fully and do something about it. And so I feel like it's going to be similar for a lot of people. Like some truths or some things that they found out earlier in the month are now meant to be acted on or changed in some type of way, step by step. Because it's Taurus. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Like the stuff that we're discovering about ourselves are deeply ingrained from many possible other lifetimes, at least from childhood. And so we have to be patient with ourselves, which is good with the Taurus moon. And so I think a lot of us will be able to start a new chapter like one day at a time.
Totally.
All right.
Wonderful.
So to wrap up, where can people find you and work with you again?
Thank you. So my name is Ricardo Zivart. I've been doing astrology 14 years. I have not posted much on YouTube, but I'm definitely looking at making more videos, especially with someone as wonderful as Courtney. So thank you for bringing me on. You can catch me for readings and consultations on Instagram. My name is Ricardo. My last name, Old Dutch name, Zevert, Zeevert. You can find that in the handle on Instagram, my website.com, or reach out to me there on my YouTube. It's going to be called Lighting the Mandala.
Awesome. So I'll link all that in the description box below. And I hope you guys have such a beautiful day. Bye.
Take care.
Hell yeah. Perfect timing because it just was about to go off.